The purpose of the separation of church and state idea was not to protect government or politicians from a religious people, but to protect a religious people from the government and to prevent corruption of the church by the government. That's why they wanted to keep church and state separate. The entire meaning of separation of church and state has been turned upside down by the ACLU and the left to mean just about the exact opposite of what the Founding Fathers intended it to mean. Now think about it. If the ACLU and the left are correct that separation of church and state means that the government cannot have a general religious perspective, that would mean our Declaration of Independence itself would be unconstitutional. That would mean that the founding of the United States of America would be unconstitutional. Our Declaration of Independence bases its entire argument that we have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness on the proposition that our rights are granted by God, not the state. Our Declaration of Independence states, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So under the ACLU's absurd interpretation of separation of church and state, the very founding of the United States of America is unconstitutional because it is based on a religious idea. Let's get into this a little bit more deeply. It's interesting that modern court rulings banning even non-denominational prayer from the public schools, unless you're a Muslim, and banning the posting of the Ten Commandments in public schools say that these court rulings say virtually nothing about the First Amendment, don't even cite it as part of their argument for banning religious expression in the public schools, banning religion, especially the Christian religion, from the public square. Instead, the courts build their entire argument on this phrase, building a wall of separation between church and state. So where does this phrase come from? Well, this is a phrase that you will find in a letter written by Thomas Jefferson, addressed to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Association in 1802. Here's what Jefferson wrote, quote, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which is solely between man and God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reaches actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that an act of the whole American people which declared that their legislator should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." So there's that phrase. Thomas Jefferson was here clearly talking about the whole American people, meaning that the national government, the federal government, could not impose a national church on the states or on the American people. Jefferson explained this later in a letter that he wrote to a Presbyterian minister, where he said, quote, "Certainly no power to prescribe any religious exercise or to assume authority and religious discipline has been delegated to the general government. It must then rest with the states as far as there can be any human authority," end quote. Jefferson is writing here only about the federal government, the national government. Jefferson was assuring these religious leaders, these churches, these ministers, that the federal government had no power whatsoever to knock down state religious establishments. But it's important to note here that Jefferson did not think the central government, the federal government, should be neutral on the question of religion. In fact, as president, Thomas Jefferson used federal money to build churches and to establish missions for the purpose of converting the Indians to Christianity. What the federal government could not do was set up a national church as the official church of the land. But Jefferson would have been aghast, would have been appalled, would have been outraged if he had thought the First Amendment could be used to undermine the Christian faith, or even if the religion clause could be used to bar the federal government from favoring the Christian religion in general over, say, the Muslim religion or atheism or some other creed that would be at odds with America's founding principles of liberty and limited government. In fact, In 1803, Jefferson asked the Senate to ratify a treaty with the Kaskaskia Indians, which stipulated the following, and I'll quote. Here's what it said. And whereas the greater part of the said tribe have been baptized and received into the Catholic Church, to which they are much attached, the United States will give annually for 7 years $100 towards the support of a priest of that religion, who will engage to perform for the said tribe the duties of his office, and also to instruct as many of their children as possible in the rudiments of literature. And the United States will further give the sum of $300 to assist the said tribe in the building of a church. End quote. That was the law. In this case, the Catholic Church, which was an unpopular church in America at that time, but the Catholic Church was recognized by Jefferson, by President Jefferson, as the legitimate beneficiary of this legislation because it was the Catholics who happened to be the most involved in educating and ministering to that particular tribe. The bill was passed into law on November 25, 1803. Thus, in Jefferson's view, not only could the federal government under the Constitution advance the cause of religion generally, it could do so as circumstances warranted by using a particular denomination as its agent, even an unpopular denomination as the Catholic Church. And of course the Catholic Church was unpopular in America at the time, since America was overwhelmingly Protestant, overwhelmingly Puritan. Similar projects to educate and convert the Indians to Christianity were also passed into law with respect to other tribes under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson never expressed any opposition to a law passed on June 1, 1796 by the Fourth Congress prior to his presidency that said this, that provided for the regulating of grants of land for the Society of the United Brethren, which is a church, for the purpose of propagating the gospel to the heathen, to the Indians, the point of which was to provide federal resources, federal money, taxpayer money to this church for the purpose of proselytizing to the Indians, for the purpose of converting them to Christianity. Many presidents, including George Washington, James Monroe, James Madison, John Quincy Adams, Martin Van Buren, Andrew Jackson, they also built churches of various denominations with federal money, with taxpayer money, through treaty agreements with the aim of converting the Indians to Christianity. According to J.M. O'Neill in his book Religion and Education Under the Constitution, by 1896, this is a quote, by 1896, Congress was appropriating annually over $500,000 in support of sectarian Indian education carried out by religious organizations and churches. The Seventh Congress passed legislation making churches tax-exempt, a tradition that continues to this day, but which is under attack by the ACLU and other organizations on the left. But America's founding fathers and subsequent presidents have seen no conflict at all with making religious organizations tax-exempt. In other words, with favoring them. It has been assumed in America, at least until recently, that faith in God was not only good for the nation, but essential to its survival, and that an important government responsibility was actually to promote, encourage, and foster religious faith in America.